All right, good afternoon. Uh, Today we're just going to be focused on working through the new model that I released. It's open source. It's called Deepseek. It's a reasoning model that competes and in some ways exceeds the ChatGPT o1 model. And then, if you're paying for Pro or considering it, I honestly think at this point you don't need to. It's quite a steep price for that at $200 a month. Plus, if you're using it for the API, you're still going to pay for all those tokens. Whereas what we're going to go through today is how you can set up DeepSeek and have everything run locally, which means that there's really no high-end cost or no cost for the API if you want it to be that way. If you want to use their API, which will speed up things, then yeah, you have that as an option as well. Just real quick on what it is or how it came about. Um, this was a Chinese startup that used a bunch of older chips that companies were no longer using to try and come up with a way to get better performance out of the reasoning models. They had tried to use things like ChatGPT o1 model, found that were some gaps in it. And how they did that is they basically developed their own training set of reasoning evaluations. They then scored the results for those in terms of not just in terms of did they answer the question, how well did they do it, how good was the logic that went into that, and then from that logic, did it do a good job in actually understanding what the question was asking, actually answering the question, and then how long did it take in terms of its performance. And then they did this for a bunch of different domains and then fine-tuned the data set or sorry, fine-tuned the model to then work off of the data set. So then you could distill down the model from this big, I think their model was 600 billion parameters, and then bring it down to a much smaller subset with these models, and then use those for evaluation and train and tune closer and closer to that model. So then the thing about this is if you're thinking about this from a business perspective, whether it's your company's evaluating it or you're trying to get it to better fit your business, you can now provide it the information that you want the reasoning prompts and results for those, tell it what was doing good or bad, and then train it to your specific use case that you have in mind. So it's quite a bit of a game changer. The numbers that are out there is it took them around $5 to $6 million to train and fine tune this model. Which, if you're talking about just last week, OpenAI got a $500 billion investment from the U.S. government to try and put together new chips and storage locations and new models. This is a way of showing that with very little financial, you can still get a very robust model. In a lot of ways, a lot of the benchmarks that people are doing here now that we've had about a week to evaluate it is that it's outperforming ChatGPT in most places. There are still edge cases where the ChatGPT model works better just because it's a more general model. But again, this is completely open source. You have access to everything. That's part of what I'm going to go through today is how you can get in and start using the DeepSeek models if you wanted to locally. I'm going to go through, I'm going to install this on my computer here. I have a extension called Continue, which allows me to use any open source AI model as your code assistant. Now, this doesn't cost you anything to do, and then we're going to use Olama to download it, which means that this is completely free for you as a user to install this and run it and have your own one running locally and to really maximize what you want out of it. Now, you can still go to their website. That is going to be, it's just deepseek.com. Let me just link that out here in the chat. You can create yourself a basic user. I just use my own Google account to go in and just kind of explore and poke around with it. I've been doing experimentation with it the past couple of days, giving it some of the tasks that I had been having ChatGPT struggle with. I don't have the pro version. I just have the base version of ChatGPT. And that generally does all right for tasks. There were some that were kind of more challenging for it. If you asked it a version that required uh, any reasoning, though, it did not perform as well. And that should be expected, right? Because I'm not using the reasoning model. I think I can query it like 5 times a day, um, but I hadn't really found a true good use case for the O1 with only having that limitation of 5 a day. If it was something that I had uh, more capacity to use, I would do so, but I just didn't find it all that useful. A lot of the day-to-day stuff that I do can be done with just the base ChatGPT, and then I have versions of the Llama models here on my own computer that I use for different things. So you can see here, I've got Llama 3, I've got Mistral, and then I got a few more code-oriented versions of that with Code Llama, Code Gemma. These are kind of the most up-to-date model. But let's get started with just how you could get Deepseek running locally on your computer, and how you could serve that up and use it as, in this case, we'll just say use it as your coding assistant. So how we'll replace it here. So the first thing you want to do is you want to go to Olama's website and find the model. I will link it here in the chat. This is the version that I'm using. I'm going with the 8 billion parameter. Depending on the size of uh, laptop memory and stuff that you have, you can do different versions of it. This is a laptop. It does have an old GPU in it, but in general, a lot of the top of the line laptops that you get now will have more RAM and memory than what I have available here. So this 8 billion, by default, if you go to this on Olama, it's going to give you the 7 billion. They're about the same. There's about half a gigabyte more by going to the 8 billion version. And that's what I wanted to use here, just to get a little bit more. You get a little bit more in terms of its token base and usage out of it. So how you handle the installation for those is if you have Olama on your computer, then you just need to go into your command prompt. Just go into Olama, run, and then Deepseek. Uh, -R1 will give you the base 7 billion version. To do different versions, you're going to do the colon. This is 8B. Your options here, if you go through them, there is a 1.5 billion. So if you have a very old, small memory laptop, you can use that. 7 billion, 8 billion, 14, 32, 70, and then the full model. That's that 671 billion parameter model. It is quite large. You're going to need 400 gigabytes just to store the model, and then a lot of RAM to use it. So I would not suggest really using anything. I have about 8 gigs of RAM in this laptop, so that is why I feel a little more comfortable with the 8 billion version. Like I said, there's only a small increase in the size that it takes versus using the 7 billion. I'm kind of iffy on using some of the larger ones, so this is where I'm going to start out. We'll see how it performs. I am going to be getting a new desktop for some of these projects, as it was interfering with the Pokemon AI live stream here. It will take some time to go through and download this. I do have pretty decent speeds, but with running the stream at the same time, looks like this will probably take about 5 to 6 minutes to go through and do the installation, but I can talk a little bit more about the model itself. And I'll also probably need to restart the VS Code here once that completes. So I'll leave that up on the screen. So, oh yeah, it's even affecting the stream a bit too. Okay. So how they came up with the model is they were trying to find a way to improve the output of ChatGPT's O1 model. They had found some cases where it was not performing as well. It seemed to do broad, but when you needed very high accuracy, uh, it was not performing as well. So then they trained their own data sets in a variety of different areas and then improved those. So essentially, they took the larger model, they had broken it down to these smaller but very specific pieces, and then use those to then train the model over and fine tune it to their specific cases. So again, if you want to think about this from the business perspective, then you are a member of, if you're working at a company, you're a member of whatever the business that they are involved in. you want something that will be very specific to your use case, and then you can really figure it out. So, like for my job, a lot of what I do is focused on um, privacy, compliance, and legal. So then you can imagine developing your own data set for this is very, very challenging. And then you want to keep it proprietary. This is a great model to do it on because then you can train your own version of the model locally, with your company's computers and store it locally, and then have it so that way you can connect whatever you want to that version of the model. So in our case, like we have a team that can then use this code base as their assistant. We would then train it on all of our documents, fine tune it to those specific examples, make sure it gives me back only those specific things. You can imagine in the legal area, you don't want it to hallucinate or provide bad information. So we have to have very detailed test cases for those, and then go back and train the model to um, really focus in on use case and give you examples exactly what you're looking for. But then you also have the reasoning for it. So you can tell it to provide the logic as it goes through it. And it's really interesting to watch it go through its iterations as well. You can pull up, let's just do it here. So if you go to that chat.deepseek.com, you ask it to go through some basic questions. Let me go through here. This is one that I did earlier. Just have some basic questions that you want to ask it that ChatGPT had trouble with before even the O1 models. So, like, which number is bigger? 1.1 or 1.11 or 1.09? 1. The reason why it was struggling with this is that it was almost treating the 1.11 as I'm evaluating that 11 against the 9. And so that was the issue, essentially. So it was saying 11 is bigger than 9. Well, then 1.11 is bigger. Whereas you can see here, the 1.9 is actually the bigger number. So it was very, very simple version of it. And then another thing was if you asked ChatGPT enough times to do that, it would start to then get confused and always give you the smaller number. So then if you switched it back of what is bigger, 1.45 or 1.49, it then started to go, oh, well, I only want the one that is has one digit after the decimal. And so it would give you back that the 1.9 is always bigger. And then if you flipped it and just said smaller, it would go based off the length of the number, regardless of how large it was. So if you said, what is smaller, 1.0145 or 1.45, it had a good chance of actually telling you that the 1.45 was the larger number and the 1.045, or sorry, the 1.45 was the smaller number because it was smaller in the length of the number itself. And we can see here that it lays out, it's comparing the decimal parts because they have the same whole number. So then going through there, it actually does go through the logic of getting you the answer. And then people started feeding different brain teasers to it to try and see if you could get an answer. A lot of times it wouldn't happen. Now, do keep in mind that this is hosted in China. So if you answer or ask it anything specific to or that countermands China CCP policies, it won't provide an answer. You may see it actually start to go through it and then realize what's happening and then give out you the or kick you back the message that it's unable to provide a response. There was one basic logic question I had here. So there's a train full of people. 2 people die on the train. There are no accidents, and the 2 people are not killed by individuals they know. How could this happen? So it goes through a bunch of different logic here, but then realizes that these people are already dead. So and then they're simply being on the train, right? There's no accidents, and the deaths were not, right? And so the key here is that they were always dead when they were being transported on the train, and so it went through it. There were also some logic questions here. So if you want to think of this as there's the NCAA Final Four, right? Each team will eliminate another team along the way in those scenarios, and you realize how long that or how rounds that could be. But in this game, we're now saying that each player could be eliminated at random. So how many rounds would it take? And so here you go, 63 players must be eliminated. Let's see. Okay, so it treated this as only one player is eliminated every single round, right? And the minimum is 63. So there's still some work that could be done on the logic here, or maybe that I didn't provide enough information here, right? So there's 64 players in a game. Each round, oh, I said a player, so that's probably why. Let's say it this way. Each round, all players are assigned to eliminate another one. And now let's see how this handles it. There you go. So 6 rounds would be what is necessary to then get it down to the correct, or get it down to a single player left. And then think about it the same way as the NCAA tournament before they added the extra playing games. Once you have those final 64, there are then 6 games. Essentially, a team has to win from there on to get through the remainder of the tournament. And so that is the case there. So you can see just that 1 or 2 word difference has a huge impact on the logic that is going through here, right? I said at the beginning, each round a player is assigned to eliminate another random player, right? And so it took the assumption of only one player is being assigned. And it didn't ask any clarifying questions. It just tried to go based off of that logic. But again, this is all things that you could have run locally as much as you want. We'll check in and see how this is going. Okay, perfect. So now install the Deepseek local version. And if I go to VS Code, I should be able to now integrate that to the continue extension that I have. So that way we can see loading up here. Again, this is Wednesday. The new computer should arrive. We got on 3. Do I need to add it here? Llama. Okay. So there's a few different versions that you have here. You have Deepseek Coder. And there it goes. So there, I pulled it through. Okay. I just had to trigger the reload. But you can see here, you had to put a new version in, and then it's off and running. So really easy to get set up and run locally on your computer, where this works pretty nicely. And then you don't need, then there's no cost to doing it. Like I said, and then if you go to their web browser, you have the questions that you can ask it to understand the answers. So really, really simple to get off and running with these. It is very good in terms of the explaining the reasoning. If you wanted to go through and do something a bit more complicated, you could do that as well. So be interested to see how this handles here. Oh, and you can turn on and off web search for it. A lot of times, ChatGPT can't even do this when you have it in the chat model, but here you could at least enable that for it to be there. And then you can see if you wanted it to, oh, I wasn't even using the reasoning model there. So let's see, let's go back here to this one and see how it handles the reasoning and explain, it will explain the reasoning as it goes through. So So there it goes. So there we got the full logic on how to do it. You can see every time it encounters something as it goes through its logical steps is when it goes back and decides to reevaluate what's going through, and then think through the logic a bit more as we go through the steps there. Let's ask it to, using Python, make a Flappy Bird phone. Right, and we'll see how. Okay, so let's go through the logic, right? So it tries to figure out what's being asked. This is another thing with the reasoning models, that you want to be very specific in what you ask. Try not to generalize as much as you can when you go through these. Don't give it too much information as well, where it starts to then have thoughts that will clash with the two pieces of information that you would, or multiple pieces of information that you would provide. Um, that's why sometimes if you let these chats run on for long enough, it will start to have trouble giving you exactly what you need, because one thing that you have may now cause conflict with what you're running in later. So if you, for example, in an um, earlier prompt had given it a certain thing that it could not do, but realized that it was interfering, and you need to make sure along the way to tell it to take out that rule from the list. And then every so often, you should come back and ask it, let's say, what are the rules that you are enforcing? What are you, and this runs also based on reward as well. That's how they trained it, is they had given it, the rewards were essentially the scores. So if you tell it there will be a penalty for um, bad code or code that runs on too long, but then you hit a point where now you have some very complex code, but it's not providing you everything because it's trying to shorten the output, you may have to go back and adjust what you're telling it in terms of being able to provide uh, shorter code. Instead, you would want to say like some more concise code, which would be it would allow it to grow in size, the amount of code that you want it to provide, with the idea being that it should simplify things as much as possible. Instead of just saying, oh, provide less code is better, or things along those lines, where now you can see like the wording of what you had given to the model originally is now starting to cause it to clash with what it wants to provide to you. So you can see here, it did go through and created a script here using Pygame, go through, generate the bird, control the bird, have the pipes appear. Here we're going to draw the screen. Every so often, it's going to go through and have it appear. You can see the keys that it's using to do the controls, right? And then now we need to move and check for collisions the whole way through. And then eventually, when it will crash, you need to go through and trigger if the game has ended. So then it provides you the steps for what you need to do. Looks like you need to then provide it the images here for background, ground examples, the few animations that it has. So like when it's flying through the air, when it's flapping its wings, etc. And then actually run the script. Here's the controls. Very simple to go through and then continue over and over, right? And so you can do that, give it things here. Images should be in a PNG with transparent, so that way it can actually work through. So very simple use case here to recreate Flappy Bird, but we gave it literally one sentence. It made the whole thing back from us, or made the whole game back for us. Let's do great. Now, can you make a can you make a version of what's called, I think it's called Breakout, using Python? Blocks can be all blocks can have different point values based on their colors. A block is hit. It gives the user a point, and the block then is reduced by 1. Let's say include power-ups that will randomly drop from blocks that are hit by the ball. Keep the code concise and error free. The user has, or there will be penalties. Just to reinforce what we had said, was going through. And you can see here, it's thinking through everything that we had provided it. So here we go. I didn't mention that I had any images, so it's going to color the rectangles. Great, that simplifies things, like basic, the great logical conclusion here. Colors based on their hit points. Great, set up clock. Okay. Okay, so it understood this part, right? When I said make them multiple colors, and then now when it's hit, it's going to reduce it by a single point. I expand the pal and multi-ball. Great. Here we go. And I think this is when it's actually generating the code here. So it did 3 versions. Let's see here. Let's just make a new Python file. We've got everything here. Exit. I think I should have done /exit. There we go. Okay. Pip install pygame. Okay, take a moment to go through. Uses random. Already has it. Okay. Then put this in my documents here. We're going to call this breakout. Let's see. So now I'll bring it back here. When attempting to run the code you provided, I received the following error. Right, we can just take this, copy that, paste it in here. You can see like, oh, that's another mistake. We have this, let's take that out. New code was generated. Let's copy that back in. Make sure I save it. Now, there we go. We're off and running, right? Arrow keys handle movement. Great. Look at that. I don't know what that did. Let's go back here. Right. A few things to add after trying to play it once. When the user misses the ball, a new ball should appear on the paddle. Let the user press the up arrow to launch the ball. When the user collected the power up, nothing occurred. Allow your code to expand as necessary to include these changes. And realistically, you could do this with any game. I had just chosen Breakout because that's what it sprung to mind. Like you could do your own version of Snake, or with the Snake and Apples. You could change it to be whatever you wanted. This is just to kind of prove out what it's going. The interesting thing here is like you can see it go through its logic and work through the changes, especially the last time that I had given it a prompt saying that I got an error. So its first reaction was to give me back a quick change, but then it realized it didn't make all the changes throughout the code, and so it needed to go back and refactor, relogic what it was doing there. So now we have this version here, which it looks like it's finishing up. Let's go here. We are going to replace everything, make sure we save. We're at 127 lines now. Before it was that like 80 or so? So again, I had originally told it like keep your code concise, but this time I'd given it the command to let it expand out what it felt like or let it expand out the code that it's generating. So that way, hopefully it can include more of these cases. So now it starts where the user has to press the up button to start the game, right? So there we go. Go through. Uh-oh. So right when we hit the block, it bounced off. Looks like this time it's doing it a little bit better. Okay, that time it took out multiple. You can see there it did it again. Um, we got a slightly bigger paddle. We've got, what is the orange one do? Okay, so a few things we saw here, right? Just working through this. Few things from the most recent test. The orange power up seems to have no effect. The player lives or balls remaining are not displayed to the I should go back and keep this consistent. I said player, I should say player here again. So this may be why this should launch a new ball right away. We saw that, and then also there were some issues with the collision detection. The ball was frequently bouncing up instead of down after hitting a rectangle. And so it's going through the logic it needs to then properly make the adjustments. We'll then see how well it does when we go through these one by one and see how it handles it. So let's see. We're at 127 lines. Honestly, it's not too bad. I don't see anything egregious just by quickly scanning through it. Okay. Looks like it included some of those changes. Let's see. We're at 150 lines. Again, not really not all that large. So here we go. Good. Oh, interesting that it immediately threw the ball back out. I think we have just encountered a glitch. There we go. Right. It's just stuck. Okay. Um, go back to here. Error has been found. The ball immediately launches from the paddle to start the game. And when the user loses a life, correct, so that the up arrow allows the user to control when the ball launches. Here we go. So here it's still struggling to understand what exactly is happening. There we go. So now it's starting to understand the logic. But you can see here, when I had used ChatGPT for coding previously, if I think back to like the Unity project, a lot of times it would get really stuck on trying to understand um, why things were happening a certain way. And I was completely new to Unity. Like I really haven't used it outside of that project. And it was really struggling to help me understand how to properly put things in. So here, like having the logic brought out to me, it helps me to understand what it's thinking through so I can better understand and learn from the process of going through and trying to debug the issues as it happens here in the code. So I could better understand kind of what is it actually intending to do based on the prompt that I'd given it, because then maybe I need to go back and improve my prompt that I given it. So let's see here what we got. Save. Go. So interesting. That was definitely an issue. Now I don't know which one to keep, and I end up losing them all, huh? The ball does not move with the paddle. So you can see here, like basic issues just keep happening over and over again. So an error has occurred. The ball does not move with the paddle before it is. So now we're iterating and fixing through the bugs of things actually occurring when they happen. Let's see here. Just waiting for it to finish out. So here we go. I increased by a few lines. It's fine. So, okay, that moves with me now. And if I push it, okay, it's going to launch randomly. Great. Let's see if we can get. Whoa, okay. So if you get it to go up in the line between them, it looks like it launches them, or it will knock out all of the lines all at once. Trying to spin it up and get it to go back up over the top. Uh, and then we just grabbed the power up to make the paddle bigger. It lasted like only a couple frames, which was not particularly helpful. Not getting that many power ups compared to before. I don't know if it's just random every time, or if we had gotten, I guess, lucky for those occurrences. Good, I got it up top. There we go. Okay. So it grows for a second or two and then shrinks down. Okay. Not quite what I was expecting. Interesting. So I lost basically all the extra balls that I had. Try and save what I can. Oh no, bad performance by me. So a few things to change. All right, we'll just let this run out. But it does do the basics of the game that we had asked it to, right? We had basic breakout, and now we can just iterate on what it does. But you can see here, we spent, what, maybe 20 minutes to, well, we got the basic version up and running very quickly. And then iterating on small things like bugs were here. I've only been streaming for what, about 45-ish minutes now, that this had been going pretty well in terms of just getting things out and running. Hey, org, or I guess ogre, depending on how you're gonna use that 3 there. Um, that this was kind of surprising that it had gotten up so quickly, and then when we had encountered those bugs and asked it to go through it, it actually processed or tried to understand the code that it had provided to me, and then process through what those errors were. There was one example here where I had given it that the rectangle was being the issue, and then it had corrected itself before it had passed the code back to me. That we then started to get the corrected output for the code there, and then providing it small things. It did, unfortunately, like that one time when I asked it to fix the paddle or fix it to use the up arrow to launch the ball, then stop moving it. So then we had to go back and ask it to fix there. So always remember that when you're asking it to display the reasoning that's going on, that it will take longer to get the responses back because you're asking it to do more of the self-evaluation along the way. So if you're looking for things quickly, the chat versions are the better versions. Same thing for ChatGPT. The reasoning models, you need to treat them a little bit differently than you would the chat models, which I think is one of the differences that users will start to have to understand is in the reasoning, you want to lay it out like what is the task that you want it to do, uh, any formatting things like any specific format that you want it in, like be very specific with your asks for it. Give it the, uh, I guess called like, give it some of the edge cases to think through, give it examples if you can, and then tell it how you're going to punish it so that way it can incorporate that into its logic, right? If you want to think about this just from this coding up a game perspective, right? If I were a teacher asking my students to code the game, I want them to go through and test it, think of some of the edge cases here and put that into their code before they would submit it. And you want to do the same thing with these logic models. Same process for if you're asking it a question that requires more reasoning. Try and give it an example or two, and you'll start to see better performance in terms of what you're getting out of it. If you remember, I want to say probably about 6 or 8 months ago, when people started to really start to squeeze more out of ChatGPT, is when they started to do some of the um, prompt, the classification prompts. So it'd be like zero shot classifier where you didn't give it any examples. It was like the base version of what you're always going to have. But then people started providing it with like 2 or 3 examples, and then that led to people getting better results from the GPT models as well. And you're going to have the same thing here, where if you're asking it to reason through, provide it what the limitations are ahead of time so it can incorporate those in. Ogre said, I want to try it with a small, medium code base as context and ask it to make changes. Haven't got it working yet. So if you have Visual Studio as your code base here, what you can do is there's an extension called Continue, which is what I have installed here. You can then tell it what model that you want to use based off of what you had installed locally. So like I've used Olama to install the Deepseek model here. I can ask it questions, but then when I go into my code and ask it to make changes, if you hit Control I, it now allows me to specifically refer to the code that I have up on the screen. So that way you can do it as well. You can also then, when you have it this way, tell it the other files using your file structure, and it will go through those as well. So that way, it's now using your code base as its context, and then you can make the changes that you want. So give it a shot here. I use VS Code, so that's what I know it has as examples. If you were here in the window, you can extract, or you can give it the file here and it will extract the text out as code if you specify that it is code files. I know there are limitations here. Yeah, you can see like it tells you that you can only have 50 files. So it gets more troublesome. If you've got like a large project folder, that it wouldn't be able to incorporate all those in. So like I've been using the CodeGemma to go through some of the changes here for what I was doing for the Pokemon reinforcement learning. And it's still, I would say it performs better. My laptop has limitations where it's not so powerful, uh, that it's really slow in generating the responses because it has to read in all the files that are here. And so you can see like this file itself, it's not too long. There's a lot of like single lines here for dictionary explanations and stuff like that, but it still struggles sometimes with getting out specific pieces of information for those. And so I have to kind of give it explicit reminders. And I don't think that these LLMs are perfect at these yet. I know Microsoft now has their Copilot embedded in a lot of places that I've seen some people using that. I haven't used it yet enough to tell you whether it's going great or not. But that would be a good place for you to start trying it out and seeing if that helps you as well. And then Erico says, hello. Well, hi, thanks for coming. And hopefully you're finding these called text exploration streams useful, where we go through kind of recent developments in the AI and LLM space. Deepseek was just released last week, open source. I just started using Gemini within Emacs. I was using Claude before. Gemini's big context window is really nice. Yes, there are. Gemini, I think, has one of the largest context windows, especially for their free models. ChatGPT, depending on which model you use, has different limitations to the context window. I know I'm encountering that with the work that I do for my regular job as well, where we had been using in one place an old the GPT 3.5 Turbo model, which has the 3200 token context window, which was troublesome before. We had recently just updated that to 4.0. It's the same cost for using those, so there wasn't any. We didn't have to make any special consideration for that. But we needed to, or sorry, not 4.0, the GPT-4 Turbo, to switch over to that, and that has the 128K context window. So, once you have a code base that has grown very large, it's probably worth it at some point to ask your GPT models to try and go through and consolidate your code base. Not necessarily that it's cutting out important things, and you want to check that. Make sure you do a lot of testing, keep the old version, and then work on the new version, because you want to make sure that it's keeping everything that you need, but consolidating things as it just happens to kind of grow over time. What we've done at work is started to use, we started to feed it code files and then have it generate our test cases for us, where it's pretty good at understanding explicit test cases in the context of like what it coded, but not necessarily with things that would happen outside of what's occurring in your code. So you have things like malicious actors, people who are trying to, let's just say, like do SQL injections, those type of things that the code base, it hadn't done a good job until I explicitly mentioned to do those. Like it just didn't think about that naturally in terms of its test cases, because we have external facing APIs for our users to go in and use our information. So we don't want them to go in and mess with our code bases or the data sets in the backbone. So it's generally been very good, but there's still limitations there. Obviously, it's it can't think of everything out of the box, although a lot of people would like to say that it could. And I'm happy to take questions for the next couple minutes. I honestly was just I've gotten through the things that I had wanted to explore here. I was kind of surprised with how quickly it was able to get up and running with even just that simple example of breakout. I had done, like I said, with I guess I have not tried the O1 models for this, as I would have already run out of queries with it. But I had tried to use this a few times before, asking ChatGPT to uh, build up a project on Unity. It was one of my first couple streams, and it had really struggled to, one, explain things well, and two, get things going very smoothly. Where it had taken about 10 hours just to get a basic version of the game up, and a lot of that was spent with an error in how it told me to go through and implement something. Do you run Deepseek R1 on Olama? Yes, I have a version here that is running locally, that I can query here directly. And then I had been just using the website version to get things back because it just runs faster through the website than it would on my computer. Because this is an older computer. In a few days, I will have a new desktop computer here, so that way I can continue to use more of the local versions. But I do have it installed locally, and it is integrated here in my Visual Studio Code. So all you have to do is use, I think I even have it here, just the command to go and install Deepseek on Olama, and then continue allows you to pull any of your local data sets here, if you'd like, to use them as your code assistant. And then they have an option here, if you wanted to, you could use some of the other options that are out here and available for people to use. You can use Vertex. I just saw OpenAI. There's Mistral. So there's a bunch of different ones that you want to use. You have options to use all of them. But so what is this tool? Oh, so this is just this continue extension that I have installed in Visual Studio here. So this is Visual Studio Code, and then one of the installed extensions that I have is Continue. It's completely free to use. That's a lot of what I discuss with others or have done in my videos, is just trying to give people free versions of the tools, because a lot of times, and especially now with the release of DeepSeek, is that it's a free tool for people to really leverage and make the most out of it. A lot of times, you may not want to use the reasoning model itself, so you want to be sure the times when you're using it, like, because there's a trade-off, right, in asking it to go through its reasoning. It will lead to better output overall if you allow it to use the reasoning model in terms of trying to generate things for you. But sometimes if you're just wanting quick responses or you're asking it general information, then you don't need to engage the reasoning function in it. And so I wouldn't do that if I'm just trying to ask it to find general information that would be available here. So I had spent the past couple days just experimenting with this. We're already at my work discussing ways that we can work to try and implement this. All right. Hopefully this continues to pick up. Like I was saying, we're discussing trying to get security clearance for it to run. The security team is, once they saw that it was a China-based company running it, and immediately threw a bunch of red flags, but we assured them that we would only be running off of the localized version of it and then training it to our own data set, which had kind of fast-tracked the approval, because now we are the maintainers of it, not an external company. So essentially, we are using a version of the DeepSeek model,
ourselves, and then we are fine tuning it to our data set. And then that is what we are serving up internally to allow some of the compliance teams to search through their documentation more quickly to find what exactly it is that they need out of there. So it's an internal use case. It doesn't go out external to any customers. And then because we are hosting it and training it locally, there's no external factors in terms of the security risk, because the data is never going off of the premises of our server. So that's fairly nice in terms of just being generally usable by a variety of people. I'm just kind of telling you the impact here, where a week ago, our company was considering whether we should start getting the GPT Pro licenses for some of our development team users. And now we are reconsidering that as we go into the new fiscal year here on what are some of the budgets that we are allocating here. We also have started to look into some of the Ollama models here to try and improve those, or I shouldn't say improve those, try and tune those to some of our own code base and leverage that. So that way we can reduce some of the external tools that are being used. Blackbag said, I've been using the $20 a week for Anthropic for development for coding purposes. We have not used that one just because the company that I work at is a Microsoft shop. So we have OpenAI and Azure on premise. That one's pretty decent. I would say also, if you have Ollama, you can pull in CodeGemma had been pretty good. And then when I went to the ad models here, another one that I had heard good things about was, where is it? The Wizard Coder here as well. I'm not sure who maintains those, but it is provided via Ollama, so it should be free and open source to use those as well. And then it's just going to depend on what you have available on your machines to serve those up. Like we have our models sitting on a server that allows the users to ping to it. Biggest problem I've run into so far is the 4,000 tokens. A lot of times for coding, it's just not going to be enough. You can ask it for specific things. What I have available and what we provide to users is the 128K context window, which then that would alleviate that issue where you're saying it goes past the output buffer. We have it so that you can attach whole files to it. We're even opening it up where we have a version that's available to our customers that they can upload files. I believe it's as long as it's about 2 gigabytes in size. We allow them to upload those and import those to some of the compliance groups that we have. And then it automatically will essentially scan in the form that they had put in. So we can keep a record of it and then flag it for any issues that they see in terms of compliance there. But that would not be possible if we were not using the larger context windows models. So yeah, I would say this has been pretty neat to see here. I know it's been kind of running through the AI world pretty quickly. Everyone's trying to get out or get and use this, and like I said, it's an ever evolving landscape. So there's just a week ago, it was completely different. I would now suggest for most people not to get the ChatGPT Pro if you are considering it. Even just for general use cases, you're talking about it's like $2,400 for the year for it, and you're probably not going to get that much value out of it as an individual user, especially when you can have things that you can set up to run locally to do it, or even just using it in browser here, where just going to their website, they allow it's free, it's open to use. It's a company that has not spent a great deal of money compared to what you've seen OpenAI invest billions of dollars now, and they're trying to use the pro licenses and stuff like that to recoup some of the cost. but it's amazing what people can do with, I would say, some talented individuals and some old school hardware. Old school in the AI sense is probably, I think what they're using is only a few years old in terms of the hardware itself, that they've been able to just make some really groundbreaking changes. And I think the big takeaway for people on the technical side, like if you're doing work in tuning the LLMs, this release really highlighted the fact of generating and maintaining a really good testing data set to then tune the models to your specific use cases is now extremely valuable. How they had gone about their approach was to pick some use cases where they had found that ChatGPT was not performing well, create their own evaluation set, and then fine tune to that set, and then release it as an open source. Then this makes it easier for the model to be distributed, or you'll hear other people refer to it as distilled. So that way you can have versions that are very specific to your niche or more general facing models that don't need as much in terms of the high-end compute for reevaluating and retuning the whole data set. You can now focus on specific subsets of it all. So all in all, it's a great technology. I think it's going to be kind of causing people to reevaluate how they're going in, or how they're approaching some of their work in terms of the researchers who are trying to build bigger and better versions of these LLMs. Bigger does not necessarily equal better, as is proved out. You can do a lot with very little, and then for the consumers of it, now you're gonna see probably people more look for more niche. I mean niche not in terms of like the general models, but very specific use cases. I'm thinking about pre-ordering a 5090. I wonder how fast R1 runs on there. I would be curious as well. The new desktop that I'm getting, it's a 4070. So I will see how much better it performs compared to the GPU that I have on this laptop. So I have 16 gigs of memory, but I only have 4 gigs on the GPU. This will be a 12 gig GPU. So I would expect quite a bit of performance increase here. And then the RAM I'm doubling as well from the 16 to 32. And then potentially thinking about if I'm going to, because it's desktop, I can add more memory to it as well, should the need arise. Black Bag, he said, feeling optimistic, create an agent, a code base. Yeah, AutoGen. Agents can converse and then can suggest a change in their code function, but since they'll be conversing with each other. And if you only use Ollama, it should not cost anything. Yes, anything you have on Ollama will not have cost to you because you're using the local versions of them. When you mentioned here about the agents, essentially, if you're using the reasoning model, it's acting as an agent for you in terms of your evaluation. For the work that I do, we use, it's called LLM as a judge, but essentially we use a different model to evaluate the output of the original model that we've gotten. We use this in testing and in terms of maintaining accuracy in the model. So that this way we have a good idea on what we're getting out. The only problem is that would take O squared for the more agents functions, the longer it takes. You would have to, well, instead of letting it expand to O squared, you want to put some limitations on this. So that way you're not increasing, you can do, because essentially if you say, with the LLM as a judge case, we're only letting it evaluate it one time. So now instead of it being O squared, it's 2O, which is essentially O in terms of the O notation. So this doesn't cause it to expand rapidly. You do want to keep limitations on this as well. Theoretically, when I was asking it to evaluate the code, I could have told it to maybe only make 5 iterations. Same thing you could do there. So that way you're not expanding out of control in terms of evaluating, going back and forth, right? It would need to converge, or yeah, exactly. You only want to do n passes. So that way you're not expanding over and over again until it eventually converges. Now it can converge to a state where it generates an answer and break out of that time sooner, but more likely it will, well, more likely, depending on what you're asking it, it becomes more and more likely that you have a case where the model can no longer converge to your original ask. And so then you'd hit a state where you could be spinning over and over and over again and never getting results. So you do want to make sure, especially in the cases with agents, you do have a lot of guardrails in place. So that way you're not hitting a case where, like you have laid out, you're getting O squared. You want to keep it down as much as possible from spinning out of control. Functions that are not affected by it should not have their assigned agents do anything. Yes, but typically how the agent framework works is that you tell the LLM that you have this group of tools, the tools are the agents, to leverage, and it decides which one to use. So if you give it enough tools or not enough in terms of its output that it can converge to what it thinks is a satisfying action or answer, it can keep passing from one agent to the other over and over again. So you do still, like I said, want to make sure you do have guardrails in place. As like you said, theoretically, it should not do it. But how it actually works is the LM is evaluating what tool it wants to use from the list that you give it. And the tools, agents and tools are interchangeable. So if you give it 2 agents that can interact with one another, then theoretically it can always bounce between those 2 agents until it gets a satisfactory conclusion. And that, again, if you left it open to the LLM in terms of your original prompt on how to generate that, you could have a case where you're spinning over and over again. So you do want to be careful. Again, think about all your edge and test cases along the way. And really in those agent frameworks, do be careful, as those edge cases will start to pop up more or sooner than you would realize. I better use tests to be the tiebreaker, test-driven development. Yeah. Always have some evaluation metric and provide that to the model when you're asking it these questions, especially if you're going to be asking it like code-related questions. It may also, if you tell it to like evaluate a whole code base, if you have so many files that it can pull in one at a time, you may also have it use a lot of tokens to try and read in your whole database in the pieces, because the agent can do that, but not really be able to generate a satisfactory answer, or you run out of context window in the response that it gives you. Right. So if you're, let's say you need to pull something out of your code base and it needs to provide back all the answers, then you're going to hit a case where you run out of that context window in terms of the response. So yeah, once you get into the agent frameworks, really keep things buttoned up and not let it expand over and over again and get out of control. So does anybody have any other questions? I had, I don't really have anything else at to cover for today. I just think we've been having some good interaction here. So I had originally planned for about an hour. I know we're a little over that, but I do have the time to go back and forth. I know this is on YouTube and Twitch, which is why I pop up the questions. So that way, if you're on one platform or another, you at least see those and know what I'm referring to. Well, then, if not, I will be bringing today's stream down. Instead, a new desktop arrives for me on Wednesday. I'll be probably spending that evening getting everything set up, and then hopefully being able to run the streams of the AIs learning through Pokemon. We've been doing a reinforcement learning project. What I'm hoping with that new computer as well is to use one of these local models where I will extract screenshots from the LLM or from the game, have it pass it to the LLM to determine the next couple moves to take, and then have it do those moves. A lot of the issue that I'm running into was the system frequently running out of memory when I was trying to let it do long training sessions. It also was not going very fast. I had been having the streams run on some of the trained models. Like I had one that made it to Cerulean City. When I had done the stream, it had gotten stuck at Mount Moon, not finding its way through there. That only had 4 agents instead of 24. What I'm hoping is that with the updated model, I can go ahead and get it through, I'm hoping at least through Cerulean, and then figure out what it needs to do after that. Because it has not figured out Bill's laboratory yet, and it has not figured out really Cerulean Gym. Another idea is for it to evaluate the map coverage that it had, because I think what's happening is it's not going through and covering all the squares along the way when it finds a new location. And so it's frequently missing out on the steps in Mount Moon, especially the ones that are more towards the middle instead of being up against the edge, which is pretty frequent there. When it's exploring kind of the general overworld map, you can bump up against the edges until you kind of fall into a building. You'll hit all the edges there and explore that space and then kind of come back out. And that has been, I think, one of the issues with Mount Moon in particular. First, it had been getting sent back to that Pokemon Center over and over, and then never finding on that second level at the very back how to properly get out of there. And then I'm hoping with more hardware that we can, or I can let it train more and hopefully learn the way through. It did seem like the implementation that I'd had to get it to have none of the encounters is now working correctly. So we'll close this out here. I got the map IDs here. I extracted the list for that. And then once it goes through, just go through this quick. Here, once an agent is in Mount Moon, it sets there. It no longer encounters Pokemon along the way there, which is great. That means that this is working correctly. And then, like I said, every 50 steps, it now will give it 10,000 if it's below that point in time. So that way it has money. It still hasn't figured out reliably how to buy from the Pokemon Mart. I think there was one time where it had done so. Either that or it got really lucky and had captured a Pokemon with every Pokeball, because we had an agent that had a full party, which you had the starter Pokemon and 5 Pokeballs. So it managed to not waste a Pokeball on a trainer fight, which I've seen it do plenty of times. And then also, I guess it has succeeded every time that it had gone through there. So I'm hoping that we continue to have that progress. And at tomorrow's check-in, I'll go through and maybe see if I can implement it to go through the map as it sees it and try and make sure it explores every single location. So that's all for today, and I will see you all tomorrow, where we'll go through the Pokemon stream, and then it'll be off Wednesday because the new computer should arrive, and then get that set up, and then we'll be back on Thursday as well. So for those of you that were here and active, thank you very much for providing good questions and commentary. And then if you're on YouTube seeing this afterwards, please feel free to leave comments. I'll be there to answer them on anything specifically that you have in mind. And this shows you kind of how you can get running with Deepseek locally, and even just some of the examples that we had here, where it shows you the logic along the way, which I think is very interesting to me personally, because now I can understand how it's trying to get to the conclusions that it does in terms of what it provides to you. So That's all for today, and I will see you all tomorrow. Have a great night.